Wow, so the Canadiens actually did it. They took Juraj Slafkovsky first overall in last week's NHL entry draft. I sure wish there were a group of friends I could talk about this over a podcast with. Oh, hey, wait a minute. There's Stu and there's Rick and even Andrew's here. No, I love you, Andrew. I love you, Andrew. I'm glad you're here. We might as well do this on Hockey Inside Out, everybody. Let's talk about the NHL draft. Julian McKenzie, alongside Stu Cowan of the Montreal Gazette, Rick Green, former #1 overall pick. He knows a thing or two about that. And Andrew Berkshire, once again, tapping in for Jessica Resnick from the SDPN. Thank you again for doing this on such a busy schedule you have, Andrew.
Yeah, so many games to cover right now.
Yeah, seriously. So many game over episodes to do. Anyway, the NHL draft has come and gone, and the Montreal Canadiens have decided to make Juraj Slafkovsky the first overall pick, and not Shane Wright, who a lot of people thought would go #1. Stu, I know you've been at development camp. You've seen him firsthand. I'll get your thoughts on that after I ask Rick first, because it's good to have seniority, go first. Actually, who's older between you two? I would guess Rick.
Around this, I think Rick might be a year or two older than me. But I was never a #1.
56 model, old 56 model and counting.
Yeah, so we'll do the age thing first here. So, Rick, what did you think of Juraj Slafkovsky going first overall by the Montreal Canadiens?
Well, I think right from the hiring of Kent Hughes, I mean, he's publicly said, listen, I want to get bigger. I want to get faster. I want to get guys that, hopefully are going to be here for the long term. And, with his first draft, I think he's obviously made that statement and reinforced the point that he likes the idea of getting some good character guys. And I guess this Slafkovsky is supposed to be that kind of guy where he wants to be on the ice. He wants to be in all, key situations, can skate, character, a good two-way player. Listen, a little bit of a crapshoot, but he's got all the ingredients to fill the bill as far as what the Canadiens are looking for, with good size and great potential. So hopefully it's going to work out well. I like the choice. Now we'll see how this kid plays out. But one thing for sure, he said that he's really happy to be here in Montreal with a hockey city that people love their players, and he'll figure out pretty quickly. They'll love you providing that you win and you tie it.
No, I was surprised at first when they made the selection. I was less surprised after Kent Hughes made the trade for Kirby Dach, because I thought, to me, Shane Wright, it was the safe pick. Shane Wright's going to be a good NHL player, in my opinion. Worst case scenario, he's going to be a solid second, third line center for many years. He already plays a 200-foot game. He's got good hockey IQ. He can skate. He's got everything. To me, he's almost a guaranteed solid NHL player. He's not going to be a generational player. I don't think he's going to be a superstar player, but I think he's going to be a solid NHL player. With Slafkovsky, when I saw him the day before the draft, he's so impressive. He's a big kid. Like, he's really big, and he's confident, and he's got a swagger to him. And the more I see him and the more I talk to him, the more I understand why Kent Hughes wanted this kid. Joel Armia has also got a lot of size, but Joel Armia is sort of like his shy, quiet, nice guy, and that's how he plays hockey too, unfortunately. Whereas this kid has got size, but as I said, he's got a swagger. And I'm thinking to myself, it's hard to believe this kid is 18 years old. Physically, the way he handles himself. Kent Hughes said, one of the things that really impressed him in the interview is that this kid was living by himself when he was 15 years old. He went to play for the U16 team in Slovakia. And Kent Hughes said, "Oh, so you lived in a dorm?" And he went, "No." "Oh, so one of your parents went and lived with you?" And he went, "No." "You lived by yourself?" He went, "Yeah." And Kent Hughes says, "Well, how'd you cook?" And he went, "With a stove."
The stove. That was such a great quote.
He didn't say Uber Eats.
No.
So it's just he's got a maturity to him. Physically, he's mature. Mentally, he's mature. His English is very good, which is going to make it easier for him. I asked him about that the other day, and he said he took some English courses at school, and his parents also enrolled him in English classes when he was young. And he says he's really thankful that they did that. He's picking up a few words of French here and there. He's been recognized all around the city. He seems to enjoy the spotlight. And in that way, he reminds you a little bit of PK Subban, who enjoyed being in the spotlight, enjoyed doing interviews, enjoyed the cameras on him. So he's got that little bit of a swagger to him. So I understand, the more I see this kid, the more I understand why Kent Hughes drafted him. And the fact that he also pulled off the trade to get a center in Kirby Dach, it all makes sense to me.
Yeah, it does make sense. You see things falling into place as the draft goes on. And I think one takeaway that I had from this draft is that this new management team is extremely confident in their ability to develop players. So they're taking home run swings. Slafkovsky is not the sure thing that Shane Wright is, right? Like, worst case scenario, most likely, Shane Wright will be like a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins type, which is a good NHL player, right? And Slafkovsky could technically bust. Like, his numbers in the Liga were not great this year. There's extenuating circumstances to that, of course, but this is a kid who has extremely high potential, but there's also the potential to fall apart. The confidence there gives me confidence that he probably won't, but he's not a player that I'd put in the NHL right away. I think that he needs some time to get his scoring numbers up a little bit and show everyone that he can play with men and actually score. Obviously, he's been playing with men in Finland now for a year, but he's a very interesting player. The size also is, something that the Canadiens are clearly looking at with acquiring the 6'4" Kirby Dach as well. And if Kirby Dach ends up as a solid second line center with the Montreal Canadiens, I think we're going to be looking back at this draft as a big inflection point for this rebuild.
Absolutely. I want to get to the Kirby Dach thing, but I also just want to comment on how confident Slafkovsky seems. Like, we've heard about some of the quotes he's been saying before the draft, and he pretty much said, like, hey, I could easily be that winger for Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. Like, I love that. I think that is exciting just as a media member. If that guy's going to be able to put out quotes like that, I understand maybe the team will kind of media train him a little bit more. But that confidence, if you have that, it's going to shine through no matter how much people try to kind of bring you down in terms of media training.
But he has that confidence without being too cocky, as Kent Hughes said, because he did say that before the draft. Like, I could see myself fitting in with Suzuki and Caulfield on a line. And then after the first on-ice session Monday in Brassard, he said that Cole Caulfield had texted him. And I said, so did Cole tell you, that you're going to fit with him? And he says, well, no. He says, he's already there. I'm not there yet. I got to prove that I belong there. So it was a good follow-up answer to that, where he's and I'd be surprised if he doesn't start the season in the NHL and play at least 9 games, because I think they want to see what he's going to look like with these two guys, because that could be your number one line moving forward. But he's sure, for a big winger like that, playing with those two guys, if he can develop into what the Canadiens think he can be, that could be one heck of a line for many years to come.
And I think it's very interesting too that the interview process that they do now with these kids, for whatever it's worth, again, it's a little bit of a guessing game. But my understanding that Shane Wright had a couple of questionable answers that didn't sit well with the Montreal Canadiens, and again, for whatever it's worth, it didn't trigger the interest that maybe he was hoping it would trigger. And guess what? We move on from there.
Yeah, Shane Wright had a long interview with Vinny Lecavalier, and you wonder what Lecavalier said to Kent Hughes after the interview. Was maybe there was some warning signs that came out. I was told, somebody I respect in the hockey world told me that he thought Shane Wright got some bad advice, when he was saying, I should be number one, I am number one. And he said, he's not a generational player. Like, it's and Slafkovsky had the great answer. He said, I don't care where I get drafted. I just want to be, when I retire, I want to be the best player who came out of this draft. And I think there's a little bit more maturity. I mean, you live alone when you're 15 years old, you're going to mature pretty quickly. So people are dumping on Shane Wright, he's stared down. People forget a lot. These kids are 18 years old. They're kids. Shane Wright was the exceptional player status. He was going to be the number one pick for 4 years. He got there. Not only was he not number one, he wasn't number two, he wasn't number three, number four. So people forget their kids. How would you have reacted at 18 years old if something like that happened to you? I think people need to remember that. And same with Slafkovsky. He's 18. He's a very mature 18. And Shane Wright's maybe a little bit less mature 18, but he's 18.
Depending on the personality, I think you really have to be careful as far as, making comments like, I deserve to be picked number one, which for me, hearing that, maybe it was not intended to sound that way, but for me, it didn't sit well. And you have to really be careful when you haven't played one NHL game to start blowing your horn and thinking that you're the best thing going and all that stuff. But and end up coming probably back to bite him. So obviously great player, but different personalities handle the media different ways.
It could also serve as a motivator for him. That's how I'm seeing it for Shane Wright. You're absolutely right.
He's got a chip on his shoulder now.
That's exactly it. And whether he intended to stare down the Canadiens or not, I definitely see Shane Wright as somebody who was going to at least use what happened to him at the draft as motivation. I want to move on quickly to Kirby Dach, though.
The best thing that ever happened to Shane Wright, because here's a kid who's 15 years old, was told how great he was, and all of a sudden somebody said, well, maybe you're not that great. And he's going to Seattle. It's going to be a lot less bright spotlight on him than there would be in Montreal. So in the end, this could be the best thing that happened to him. And 6-7 years ago from now, we might be sitting here, if we're all still together in the show, saying, man, did the Canadiens ever screw up by not drafting Shane Wright?
Okay, with Kirby Dach, that trade, though, they have a guy who could probably be the second or third line center. Looks as if he's a good player defensively. Still remains to be seen what his offensive upside could really be. Also, if we talk about how Nick Suzuki wasn't great at faceoffs, I think among like 300 forwards who have taken draws last year, like Kirby Dach, I think had like the worst faceoff percentage of anyone last year. This is still a guy who was number 3 overall in his draft year and still 21 years old and still a big body. And he wants to work with Martin St. Louis here in Montreal. He went out of his way to mention that when he was introduced to the media over Zoom a couple of days ago. Of course, he comes in, and as a result of all the trades being done by the Canadiens, Alexander Romanov is on the way out, and he's now part of the New York Islanders organization. Stu, what did you think of the flurry of activity trade-wise that sees Alexander Romanov go to the Islanders and Kirby Dach coming from Chicago to Montreal?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, Kent Hughes has a plan. He had a plan, and I think if he didn't pull off the trade for Dach, he would have drafted Shane Wright. But he has a plan of what he wants to do moving forward. He said he wants to get bigger and faster down the middle. Kirby Dach does that. He's bigger than Shane Wright, probably quicker than Shane Wright. Thing with Kirby Dach also, I mean, this is a kid who was the captain of the World Junior team, 2021, I think it was, and Blackhawks loaned him to the junior team, and then he fractured his wrist in one of the pre-tournament games. Missed a whole bunch of time. That set him back a little bit. He had a shoulder injury last season, so he had COVID. So he's had a lot of things go bad for him that weren't really in his control with injuries and in COVID. And the Canadiens obviously see something in this kid, and you don't become captain of the World Junior team unless you're a special hockey player, right? And they see something in him, and the whole thing with this new Canadiens management team is development. First day on the ice at the development camp, there was 13 coaches. There's 13 people on the ice wearing coaching tracksuits. I've never seen that before at any kind of a practice. Usually 3 or 4. Marie-Philippe Poulin was one. Vinny Lecavalier was one. They're so focused. These kids are going to be so well surrounded now, much more so than they were in the previous administration. Slafkovsky scored a nice goal Monday in the 1-on-1. He skated by, and Vinny Lecavalier stopped him and sort of said something to him. And whatever Slafkovsky said back to him, Lecavalier started laughing. But just imagine that, you're a kid and you come by and there's Vinny Lecavalier and there's Marie-Philippe Poulin and there's all these people around you that are there to support you and help you. So the Canadiens think with Kirby Dach that the potential is obviously there. Again, going back, he's captain of the World Junior team. And Hughes he wants to have a team that are all sort of in that same age group, right? 21, 22, 23, 24. It's become obvious that's what he wants. A lot of his trades, rather than getting a first or second round pick, he's getting someone who was a first or second round pick 2 or 3 years ago. Justin Barron comes to mind. So they're going to have all these guys around the same age, and they're going to develop them, and hopefully they come up all together. So remember, the young Edmonton Oilers. I'm not saying the Canes are going to be like the Gretzky Oilers, but they're just all that group at the same age and all coming up together and growing together on and off the ice. So there's a plan in place, and Kent Hughes put that plan. He really put that plan into place at the draft.
Yeah, you can tell what the plan is. It's very interesting to see how well orchestrated it's been in under a year as general manager. And obviously we won't know how these players develop, but as Stu said, they're surrounded more with support than they have been any other time. And I just want to comment on how deft this decision-making was and this asset management was in moving Romanov for eventually Kirby Dach to take a defenseman who, yes, developed his defensive game a little bit last year, but really mostly had success on the penalty kill at even strength, still doesn't move the puck up the ice well at all, doesn't create any offense. In fact, offense dies on his stick. Doesn't have much creativity, is not a great decision maker under pressure, really hasn't come very far defensively at even strength. Moving that player who's probably going to be pigeonholed as a third pairing defenseman their entire career with a third and fourth round pick for a 6'4" center who was taken third overall in the draft a couple of years ago. That is unbelievably efficient player and asset management. Even if Dach doesn't work out, just by what he's doing there, the decision-making process that he's following, that tells me this is a very, very intelligent hockey person in charge of the Montreal Canadiens right now.
I think you guys remember I've been singing Romanov's praises for quite a while now. But if you look at the depth in that defensive core now with the guys that they have up and coming, bottom line is that to get something, you have to give something up. And they felt that they could move a guy, obviously, like Romanov with some other guys to fill the void to get a big, strong centerman with, tremendous upside to complement their group up front. So, again, it's just a continuation of the plan that, Kent Hughes has in place for getting some size, getting some skill, and getting some real good kids. So, unfortunately, it's the nature of the business. But when you're dealing from, I believe, a real depth situation with the defensive core, you can allow them to move somebody like that to get another bigger piece back into your picture.
Yeah, Andrew, you nailed it. I mean, asset management he's becoming an RFA too, Romanov, so he's going to be making money. And, you got Caden Gooley coming up who can probably step right into that role that Romanov had right away at a lesser price. You have Justin Barron also. You got Jordan Hare. You got all these young defensemen coming up. They can afford to lose Romanov. And as Kent Hughes said, it wasn't an easy decision to let him go, but you got to give something to get something. So the Canadiens, it didn't hurt their depth at all. They have all these young defensemen coming up. They're going to have to make room for them. And this is a way to make room for them. It's a way to help with the salary cap, and that Romanov's going to get a raise. And now you see reports that he's been offered money to stay in the K or go back to the KHL. Who knows what's going to happen with that situation? But Kent Hughes is just he's a smart guy. He came into this job with a plan, along with Gorton, and they're putting that plan in place. And with Marty St. Louis, Dach's a player that Marty St. Louis thinks he can work with, and we've seen what Marty St. Louis did with Cole Caulfield, right? So young players are going to listen to Marty St. Louis. They have a respect for Marty St. Louis. He'll work with, doesn't matter, old guys, young guys. And as I said, it's just nice to see, I wrote a column, it's nice to see the Canadiens finally have a plan with Marc Bergevin. It was sort of like plug a hole here, try and plug a hole here. They didn't seem to have an overall general plan of what they wanted this team to be, and now they do.
Hey, Marc Bergevin had one plan. It was acquire as many Marc Bergevin defensemen as he possibly could.
And hope Carey Price gets you into the playoffs. Don't forget that.
And then go acquire veteran guys at the trade deadline and play them instead of your young prospects, and make your young prospects healthy scratches.
Steve Ott.
But just make the playoffs, guys. Anything can happen.
2 words: Dwight King.
Yeah.
Oof. Forgot about him.
What about Andreas Martinson?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. There was a deadline where it was like Steve Ott, Dwight King, and Andreas Martinson.
Yep.
Well, we had Romanov and Kulak as healthy scratches, right, for the playoffs to play the other 2 guys he got at the trade deadline. And then when they finally put Romanov and Kulak together as a third pairing, they looked pretty good. Yeah. As they went through the first 3 rounds, they were playing 4 defensemen because they were afraid to put anybody else on the ice.
Remember at the 2021 bubble, like the first few games, Cole Caulfield and Jesperi Kotkaniemi didn't play. Say what you want about Jesperi Kotkaniemi in Montreal, he at least showed up in the playoffs. At least the 2 campaigns he was here, and Cole Caulfield was Cole Caulfield. I mean, probably could have handled things a lot better with some of the younger players in the previous regime.
The previous regime was very good at killing the confidence of young prospects.
Yep.
So Kent Hughes, first ever time running the draft for the team, for the Canadiens, get some moves done. We know there's free agency to come. We don't know what he's going to do for that yet, but I'd like to know if you could give Kent Hughes a grade for how he handled the draft and that Kirby Dach trade. What grade would you give him? I guess we could give him letter grades just to make this easy for everybody. Andrew, what grade would you give Kent Hughes?
Listen, I'm not the prospect person that I used to be. I don't have the time to review how good every player is going to be, so it's tough to make a.
Get it? You're a busy person, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, we all are, right? I think one of my things is like you have to admit what you don't know and where you rely on other people, right? And I rely on other scouts to tell me like what is this player? Is it good? Whatever. From what I've read, it seems like the Canadiens did a pretty good job here, especially with Owen Beck and Lane Hudson, which are big home run swings. So, like in 10 years, we might look back at this draft and say, wow, they missed big time. But at this moment in time, in trading for Kirby Dach, in swinging big on Slafkovsky, on Owen Beck, on Lane Hudson, these players that can change the franchise in a significant way, I have to give an A just because I like the process behind it. It could go wrong 100%. I remember one of the Bergevin drafts, I think it was like back in maybe 2012, where he took like the first 5 players he took were all rated in Corey Pronman's top 30, but then Dalton Thrower has issues. I believe his mom passed away. Tim Bozon had meningitis, all these things happen. Things out of your control happen and ruin development. Development under Bergevin wasn't good in the first place, but just as a solid block of prospects added to the organization, along with Kirby Dach, the amount of picks they made, the philosophy of what they're going for, I have to give Kent Hughes an A.
Yeah, and Andrew, like you said, it's a tough guesstimate as far as how a lot of these kids are going to turn out. They're all unique in their own way, but Kent Hughes for sure has, as we've touched on before, has had a plan on what he wants to do. I mean, he doesn't mess around. When he sees the opportunity to do something, he goes for it. I mean, if you look back on the coaching change, he let it ride for a little bit, and then finally he said, you know what, time for a coaching change. And then he's had this plan basically drawn up with this group that says, okay, let's look at our overall picture and let's continue to strive for getting the type of identity that we want as the Montreal Canadiens in their size, speed, and skill. And I think early on, seeing what he's done, I think that he's pulled the trigger on some really interesting things. Time will tell whether or not they play out, but an A grade for a guy that doesn't sit on his hands and does Band-Aid treatments. He's a guy that he pulls the trigger when he sees that it's going to fill the bill for the type of personnel that he wants to have in the organization.
Yeah, I'm going to give him an A- only because I'm still wondering, like the Shane Wright thing. Like 5 years from now, we might come back here and give him an F because he didn't Shane Wright. So I'm going to give it an A-. But just as we said, having a plan. They went into this draft with a plan. They knew what they wanted. They know what kind of players they want to draft that can play for Marty St. Louis, and they put it into place. So the plan is, Kent Hughes is a really smart guy, very comfortable in his own skin. Which I'm not sure how comfortable Marc Bergevin was in his own skin. He always seemed to be worried and couldn't really make a solid. It was here and there, right? There was no, this is what we're doing. There was no, and now this is what we're doing. And as we were mentioning earlier, you got Slafkovsky, you got Dach, you got another center that they obviously think can be as good or close to as good as Shane Wright can be. He's further ahead in the development process, which sort of speeds up the Canadiens' rebuilding process also with somebody at that age. And that's been a common theme since he took over as GM, as we mentioned earlier, getting those players in that 21, 22, 23 age group and having them progress. So I'd give him an A+ if I wasn't, I just, in the back of my mind, like I wouldn't be shocked if 5 years from now we're back here and saying, my God, why didn't they draft Shane Wright?
Yeah, it's very tough to take the winger over the center. I think anytime you do that, you're making a big, big gamble. But I like the big swing. I like having a GM who's not afraid to make the big swing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And
okay,
confident enough that I think Kent Hughes, from my personal deals, I think he's a guy who made a lot of money as a player agent, right? He didn't need this job. He didn't even want this job the first time they called him for it. But a Montreal guy, he came back. He has a plan. He's confident in his plan. He's going to do what he does. He's not going to worry about us or anybody else second guessing him. If it works out and he builds a team, he's a hero in this city, right? Great. If it doesn't work out, he gets fired. He goes back to either his agent business or he retires and goes back to his nice house in Massachusetts. He's just very comfortable in everything he does. And the pressure doesn't seem to affect him. He's going to do his thing. He's going to deal with people well. His people skills are 1,000 times better than what Marc Bergevin's were. And he's a confident, smart guy. And those are the kind of guys you want running your hockey team or running any business.
That's true. Andrew, you mentioned the 2012 draft. I managed to pull out the list of picks from that year the Canadiens made, which I believe that's Bergevin's first draft with the Canadiens.
Yeah,
So
he was hands off for that one.
So Alex Galchenyuk, obviously the third overall pick. He's actually the fifth leading scorer from that draft class. A few other guys that probably could have taken. Too. Yeah. But the names after Sebastian Kohlberg, who I know was a Swedish prospect that ended up in the Thomas Vanek deal. Remember when Thomas Vanek was acquired by the Canadiens ahead of the deadline? Dalton Thrower was also a second-round pick from that draft. Tim Bozon was a third-round pick. I don't know if you guys remember the names. Brady Vale. Charles Hudon was a fifth-round pick in that draft. And Eric Nystrom.
It was the first. All of those except for Eric Nystrom were in Corey Pronman's top, I believe, 40 prospects going into that year. So I remember coming out of that draft thinking that they absolutely nailed it. And then bit by bit, something goes wrong. Almost every single player, right? So things happen.
You all got games at least.
Well,
when Marty got games at least.
Yeah.
When Marty LaPointe and Nick Bobrov spoke after the draft, said every team thinks they had a great draft when it's over.
Yeah.
But come back in 5 years and decide. And that's the nature of the NHL draft. Every team, the scouts do their work. They have their list. They get the players. They're happy with the players they drafted, and then we'll find out how it develops. But one of the biggest problems with the Marc Bergevin era was the lack of player development. You can have that debate. Was it bad drafting or was it poor player development? And it was a combination of both. But I think the player development was even worse than what the drafting was.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Rick, what was it like? I mean, you were a first overall pick once upon a time. What was it like going through all that pressure of waiting to see if you get picked first overall? Can you take us back to that time, that year you were taken first? What was that like for you?
Well, it was a very simple process. It was, the night before the draft, Max McNabb called me up from Washington and said, Rick, we're taking you in the draft. Come down the next afternoon. So, my agent at the time said, I'm going to be probably going, you talk about first, second, third, or fourth. In the top four pick, when first, with the Capitals were first to select me, hey, great. Just wanted to play. Let's just say that the Washington Capitals of 76 versus the Montreal Canadiens of these years. There's a big difference as far as pressure points go. But the one thing will never change. If you're selected, the expectations are there that you're the real deal, and you better find a way, not necessarily pressure coming from the organization, but coming from within yourself that, hey, listen, you've got something to prove, and you do everything you can possibly do to prove it. And, the pressure comes with it, from everything outside, even more so today. Not easy, but there's a lot of kids with a lot of good character, and we're going to see how these young men handle it at 18 years old, 19 years old. It's a huge move for them. It's a big jump in the a level of play, and I'm hopeful for the selection of the Canadiens that they're going to make that transition and have a really good impact with this organization, because they're badly needed.
Rick, you were also drafted by the Nordiques in the WHA draft, right? Did you ever have any consideration of going that route?
Ooh. Yeah, the guy called me up from Quebec and said, Rick, we're looking at drafting you. Would it depend on who pays the most to which league you go to? I said yes, but actually the bottom line for me was NHL was the way to go, and I just wanted to get into the NHL, even if it was the lowly Washington Capitals of the 70s. So
hey, it's all falling on better times since.
You will never hear me say, "Oh, if I had to do it all over again, I would have done it this way." I was really thankful that I was able to get my new Corvette and do what I
Thank
did.
you. Thank you. That's what I was waiting for this whole time. I don't want to hear this whole, I want to be in the NHL.
I
I wanted that damn signing bonus. That's what I'm waiting to hear.
And I paid cash and still had some left over.
You see what I'm saying?
So it was $1 million signing bonus, was it, Rick?
What's that?
$1 million signing bonus?
Let's just say that I spent it within the first year with having to splurge for an $8,600 car.
Jeez. Imagine if we had that money, buddy. Imagine if we had that.
I was
generation's thing.
living large, so you won't hear me complain one bit.
Oh man, we will all be envious of you, Mr. Rick Green. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Hockey Inside Out. Andrew, Stu, Rick, thank you as always. With free agency coming up, we will be back once if the Canadiens make themselves some moves. Entirely possible. Don't expect them to be as active as some other teams who want to be contenders, but that doesn't mean the Canadiens won't be busy over the next few days. So we'll be a bit news driven, but we will be back once there will be more moves made by the Montreal Canadiens. In the meantime, subscribe to the Hockey Inside Out show on YouTube. Subscribe to the Hockey Inside Out newsletter. Go to MontrealGazette.com/newsletters to subscribe there. And visit HockeyInsideOut.com, and you can go back to all the previous episodes of the last year or so. A lot of fun stuff, a lot of great stuff over the last year, especially with Stu, Rick, Jess, of course, when she was here, and Andrew, when he's taken some time out of his busy schedule to join us. All right, we'll be back when we'll be back. Peace.